delighted to welcome you to the launch of this book and to a lively discussion today. A special welcome to Hywel Coleman. This is not just to the British Council in Kolkata, but to the city of Kolkata, which is sometimes officially and sometimes unofficially called the cultural capital of India. And that's because there is a very rich linguistic and cultural heritage that this city has. It was the city that published the first Urdu and Hindi newspaper. It's not just a city for Bengali literature, but of many languages. I think even now a Chinese press runs and takes out a daily or a weekly newspaper. So that's what Kolkata is about. The British Council is UK's cultural relations organization, and English, the language of international cooperation, education, technology, business, and communication, sits right at the heart of all the work that we do. And English sits alongside the key skills that any good education imparts, along with numeracy and computer skills, and this is something that everyone now recognizes. We work in partnerships with several states across the country, West Bengal, of course, Bihar, Assam, the Delhi National Region, Capital Region, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Nagaland, and of course, all the time, newer states are approaching us for English language training and support. And in most of these states, our key partners is the SSA, the SCRT, the Boards of Education, and we also have received support from the UNICEF, the Dell Foundation, Times of India Foundation, among many other foundations and organizations. We offer corporate training and direct learning to people who want to take English language classes. We have a teaching center here in Kolkata, as we have in Delhi, Chennai, and Hyderabad, and our teaching center is open, offering a range of courses to students who are interested in taking English language classes. And we have a huge program to reach more and more people digitally through English language courses which are available online. We've already done some work in this area through the Active English program on Tata Sky Digital, and perhaps you've seen the ad where a young woman, gradually increases, increases her confidence in speaking English and the way she speaks English. So the content for that is provided by the British Council. And we also work with the Times Education Foundation in TIE, especially in the Delhi area. And last month, we launched Job Seekers, a mobile phone application, which is a 3-month module for people seeking English language support for job applications and interviews. The British Council supports English as a second or other language at the primary stage using learner-centered and activity-based learning. And in fact, one can teach other languages and subjects using that framework. And we can now see that happen in many states where we have been working. For example, in Karnataka and West Bengal, the governments are adapting the methodology for other subjects. But our work in English is not restricted to the teacher, trainers, and learners. It extends beyond the classroom or strictly academic contexts. For example, we run a program called Premier Skills, which is about football and the community, and an essential component of Premier Skills is providing English language lessons by using football. One area of our English work, which we have started recently, is sharing our resources and experiences from having worked with so many countries worldwide, and documenting the success and also the lessons learned in projects that were not successful. This area of our work addresses issues that are of more interest to education and policymakers. For instance, we commissioned David Gradol to study the position and impact of English in India, and this publication was called English Next India, and this followed the earlier publication called English Next, which he had done in 2007, and English Next India was published in 2009. And of course, before English Next, he had done other research called The Future of English. So we keep doing this as an ongoing program. In December 2010, we commissioned Euromonitor International for a study on the use and opportunities around English language in 5 developing countries, entitled The Benefits of the English Language for Individuals and Societies, Quantitative Indicators from Cameroon, Nigeria, Rwanda, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And this is available in our website, teachingenglish.org UK. This book, which is going to be launched today, Dreams and Realities, Developing Countries and the English Language, brings together a selection of studies from across the globe, in a way building and expanding on the previous publications. The book and the essays are not an end in themselves. The reason we are launching this publication in India is to provoke more discussions and debate on the role of English language in India's development, and use these discussions as a launching pad for larger inquiry into the role of language education in development. I thank Hywel Coleman, the editor of Dreams and Realities, for being here with us today. He has worked extensively in Indonesia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, and West Africa, and we very much hope that he will have the time to share his expertise in India in the next few years. I also thank Dr. Shashi Panja, member, mayor in council in charge of education in Kolkata Municipal Corporation, and a member of the Legislative Assembly. Since she took over the portfolio of education in the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, there has been a remarkable transformation in the way in which education is approached. And she started this immediately on assuming office through a program called Kolkata Learning, which enables the more privileged and advanced schools to share their experience and learning and educational methods with the lesser advantaged schools. But of course, as the process is continuing, both schools on both sides find that there is an equal amount to learn from each other. It's a great privilege for us to have Dr. Ray Mackay to chair today's lecture. Ray has played a key role in the way English is being taught as a second language in primary schools across West Bengal. The books he has helped write with a team of local textbooks writers, some of whom are present here today, are displayed at the back, so I would invite you to take a look at these books as an example of what can be achieved in a relatively short time. The books have transformed the way English is taught in the classroom, closely modeled on the National Curriculum Framework of 2005. These books stress activity-based learning and learner-centered learning, teaching. They stress on listening and speaking skills in the earlier years, and then gradually include the higher order skills of reading and writing. We have conducted an evaluation recently on the impact of these books in primary schools in West Bengal, and it suggests that over 70% of primary pupils are able to carry out the spoken tasks in books 1 to 4. Contrast that with the fact that there was hardly any English at all in the primary books till 2006. I look forward to a very stimulating exchange on the topic, Do English Language Skills Pay an Economic and Social Dividend, from this panel.
Good evening, everybody. For me, it's a real honor to be part of this program, and especially, I don't know whether I have the credibility to launch such a enriching book. It speaks of a lot of experience about teaching English and the dreams and realities in the developing countries and the role of English language here. A warm welcome to Mr. Hywel Coleman, Dr. Ray Mackay. It's a pleasure because Dr. Ray Mackay has been interacting with West Bengal, and I've also had the proud privilege to work with him for our Kolkata Municipal Corporation schools. I don't know whether it's your first visit, sir, but I suppose Kolkata is very warm out here, and we bring all the warmth to you and we hope you keep coming back to us. I have met Mr. Hywel Coleman for the first time. Sujata is a very dear friend of mine and has been really helping and working very hard with the project which she spoke about, the Kolkata Learning Project, which Kolkata Municipal Corporation has launched very ambitiously, I feel, to extend English and also to extend a good quality of education to all our corporation schools. regarding this book, I was going through some of them. It's a compilation of some articles and some essays written by various authors of different countries, not only of the Indian subcontinent, but otherwise beyond this also. This country, which has so many languages and so many religions, really can't be compared with any other. You can't even compare with Pakistan or Sri Lanka or even Bangladesh, where you have much lesser languages spoken and much, I mean, very few religions, very, very few religions. Here, our thing is so diverse, so it's very difficult. We are in a very difficult situation. So putting this in the background, I welcome you all again, and thank you for this honor, Sujata. Thank you, everybody. A very good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you, Devanju.
I'm very grateful to the British Council for asking me to chair this particular session, introducing Hywel's books and fielding your questions afterwards, and I hope there will be questions. There will certainly be time for questions. Almost 30 years ago now, a paper was published in English Language Teaching Journal, which had a profound effect on me as a teacher. By that time, I had worked in a secondary school in Africa, East Africa. I had worked in a university in North Africa, and I was working in a college in Edinburgh in Scotland. I read this paper, and it changed the way I thought about English. The paper was written by a New Zealand academic called John Rogers. And in it, for the first time in my experience, John Rogers pointed out that the majority of children who are taught English really do not need English to live their lives. And it was the first time that that realization had ever been presented to me. Prior to that, I had never questioned whether English language could be anything other than necessary for development. I always thought that, of course, English language skills paid economic and social dividends. That's what English language was. That was my naive belief then. And that belief in the transformative power of the English language is what is examined throughout this very good British Council publication. That is the belief that is looked at, examined from many different directions. Is English necessarily a language that pays these social and economic dividends? To answer the questions, there is one person in this room more qualified than all of us to talk about the general issues underlying the use of English in school systems. So, ladies and gentlemen, Hywel Coleman.
Good evening, everybody. What the book tries to do is to raise some issues, as Ray pointed out, and the article which you mentioned had the same effect on me. And it had the wonderful title, The World for Sick Proper, is that right? Just to raise issues. What I'm going to do this evening is to talk about some of those issues. Some of what I'm going to talk about is in the book. Some of it is not. Some of it is more recent. Let's begin. First thing I want to say is the title is not my title. This title was created by somebody else, and I don't agree with it. Because it seems to me that it's over-privileging or over-emphasizing economic aspects of development. And what I'd like to do, to begin, is to question that. What I'm going to talk about are four main issues, and then we'll try to draw some conclusions and look towards the future. First of all, to question, is it what we're interested in just economic dividend, or are we more interested in human development more broadly? Secondly, if we are interested in an economic dividend for English, is there any evidence for it? Thirdly, are there any risks associated with English? And fourthly, we'll try to identify some roles that English clearly does play, and then conclusions. I think a good starting point to look at the question of economic development versus development more broadly is to look at the work of Amartya Sen, and his very well-known 1999 publication, Development as Freedom. What he argues is that focusing only on economic development is not sufficient. Clearly, an individual's income will help that individual to gain access to certain facilities in society, certain freedoms. But there are far more things that we need to take into consideration, not just the income that a person earns. We need to look very carefully at the opportunities that people have to access education for their children, for example, or to access the health service. We need to look at what opportunities people have to exercise their political rights, their rights as members of society, and to take part in decision-making at the community level, or to take part freely in democratic activity. All of these things need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about development. And Amartya Sen's thinking has formed the foundation of two very important documents. First of all, the Millennium Development Goals, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. We are all striving to achieve these goals by 2015. There are 8 goals which include things like poverty reduction, reducing the number of people suffering from malaria, reducing the incidence of HIV/AIDS, increasing the participation of girls in education, and so on and so on. Reducing poverty is there as well. So it's interesting that from among the 8 development goals, an explicit focus on economic aspects is there in only one of them. The other development that has been very highly influenced by Sen's thinking is the United Nations Development Programme's annual surveys of human development in every country in the world. The Human Development Reports, and the index which UNDP produces in November every year, where every country in the world is ranked so that we can make a comparison. We can see how countries compare to each other in terms of human development, and also how they have developed over the past 30, 20, 25, 30 years, something like that. As I said, the report is published every year. The 2011 report was published just about 3 weeks ago. And it looks at 169 different indicators in 17 categories, and we'll just look at a few of them. Some of them are very similar to the Millennium Development Goals. Poverty, gender equality, decent work, literacy, years in school. How many years do children spend in school on average? Not how many years does the government say that children should spend in school, but what is the reality? Maternal mortality, which is measured in terms of the number of women who die at childbirth from every 100,000 live births. Access to clean water, infant mortality, and so on and so on and so on. If we look at the UNDP reports, I think, and this list of indicators, I think if we're interested in trying to measure the contribution that English makes to development, it would be very interesting, nobody's done this yet, but it would be very interesting to go through all the indicators, 169 indicators, one by one, and ask, what role has English got to play here? What role has English got to play here? And if we did that, I think we might find some surprising answers. So what contribution does English make? And then also, not only English, but what contributions do other languages make in development, in achieving the Millennium Development Goals, for example? Let's look briefly at the most recent report. The index lists all the countries in the world. From the number of countries participating every year varies slightly. Sometimes data is not available for various reasons. But this year, there were 187 countries. The top one, number 1, was Norway. Norway is almost always the top. India is 134th position. And the Democratic Republic of Congo is at the bottom, 187. Let's look at just 2 of the indicators and ask some of these questions, this question in particular, about these two indicators. The first one is the mean years of schooling. How long do children in a particular country, on average, across the whole population, spend in school? The very highly developed nations, those are the 43 top countries, on average, children spend just over 11 years in school. The world average, all 187 countries, children spend, on average, just over 7 years in school. And in India, children spend, on average, 4.4 years in school. So this is not a very satisfactory figure, perhaps a bit surprising. But let's go back to my question. What role has English got? Is there anything that English can do to improve this figure? But if we look at the reasons why, I don't know about India, honestly, but in other parts of the world where the participation rate in education is very low, the reasons for that are schools are not there. In rural areas, children have too far to go to get to school. Or parents don't yet appreciate the value of education. So parents need to have their awareness raised. Or schools are there, but the teachers are not. Or the teachers are only irregularly there. Or when children get to school, there are no books, there is no electricity, the roof leaks, there are no toilets. There are many aspects of being in school which are not attractive and don't help children to stay in school. Or in many countries, particularly in Africa, where the medium of instruction is English or French, when the children get to school, they don't understand what's going on, because the home language is not the same as the school language. And so children cannot follow what's going on. And they drop out of school after a couple of years because they're learning nothing. So if you want to improve this figure, you need to pay attention to all of those other things. Make sure that teachers go to school. Make sure that the buildings are in good condition. Make sure that there are toilets, especially for the girls. Make sure that there are books in the school, and so on. Providing English, yeah, maybe it will motivate children, but my feeling is that there are other much more urgent aspects that need to have attention paid to them. Okay, another indicator, maternal mortality per 100,000 live births. In very highly developed countries, 16 women die from every 100,000 live births. The world average is more than 10 times that. It's 176. 176 women die from 100,000. In India, it's 230. So in other words, women in India are 14 times more likely to die when giving birth to children than women in Western Europe. Now, what role has English got in improving this figure?
It'll be only at the elite level.
Yes.
It'll not come down. So at the grassroots level, I don't think really that English can do much.
It seems to me that there are much more fundamental, practical, basic things that need to be carried out in order to improve this figure. You need to make health centers available even in the remotest areas so that women can have access to help before they give birth and at the time of birth easily. That's the first thing. People who help women, whether they're midwives or traditional birth assistants, they need training. A very interesting report recently from Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has the worst figure in the world, 1,000. And they argue that one of the factors, just one of the factors that leads to this high level is that midwives, when they're trained in English, but they're not trained how to communicate that information in the language that the mothers understand. So expecting the mothers to learn English so that they can give birth safely is not practical. What's much more important is that the midwives and the traditional birth assistants know how to communicate effectively with the mothers. So language is important there. It's one of factors, but English, I think, is a long way down the list. And I've looked back over research over the last 20 years or so. People have been asking this question for some time, and I'm going to tell you briefly about 6 different studies which have attempted to address it. The first was a study commissioned by the British Council in 1990. It was never published in full because there was no clear answer. The researchers could not find a clear answer. But it was reported briefly in an article by Chambers and Erith. But they say that it is more or less possible to test somebody's English before they take a course, test their English again at the end of the course, and you can see whether there's any change. And if there's a change, you can attribute that change to the fact that they participated in the course. Okay, but it's more difficult to show if, having taken part in that course, having improved their English, can we then say that that improves that person's life chances? Does it lead to that individual's development over their life? That's much more difficult because there are so many other factors that lead to our development, our education more broadly, the families we come from, the environment in which we live, and so on. And thirdly, they conclude, it's impossible to show whether a particular individual improving their English contributes anything at all to the national economy. A few years later, another study was commissioned by the British Department for International Development, and it came to very, very similar conclusions. In other words, they couldn't find an answer. And one of their conclusions is the link between studying English in the classroom and any later economic and human development that can be uniquely and unequivocally attributed to those English lessons is fragile. In other words, there's only a very, very tenuous connection between somebody participating in an English course and national development. The next one, François Grain, is a Swiss economist who has done a lot of work trying to investigate the relationships between language competence and economic development. His work has been mainly in Europe and Canada. He's not had, he hasn't published much, if anything actually, concerning languages in developing countries. But his conclusions are interesting. He says that if we want to look for correlations between how much language somebody knows and their development economically, we need to specify very, very precisely how we're going to measure the benefits. We can measure English quite easily. There are all sorts of ways of doing it, IELTS tests, for example. But how exactly are we going to measure the economic benefit for the individual? Their income or something else? So in order to explore this issue, we've got to be very precise about how we measure the benefit or the impact. And because of that, he warns us that broad generalizations about the value of particular languages for economic development must be avoided. You might be able to say that if this person develops a competence in French, which will probably give them a higher chance of getting a job as a French teacher, but you can't say much more than that, anything more broadly across all the people in a particular nation. I'm going to talk briefly about 2 different aspects. Firstly, a lot of research has been done looking at the language that people know before leaving home when they're going to work as migrant workers in another country. And the conclusion is that if your level, for example, somebody who's going to work in North America, they need English. If somebody has a high level of English before they leave their home country, they will earn a higher salary than somebody from the same country who has a lower level of English before they leave their home country, even if the person with the lower level of English then improves their English after arriving in North America. So it's what you know when you first arrive in the country which has an impact on your salary, your income, for the rest of your life. I think this is very useful information for governments of countries which send lots of migrant laborers abroad. What it means is you should be helping those people to improve their language skills before they leave home. When migrant workers arrive in their target country, they usually, very often, they send remittances back home. And these remittances are immensely valuable for the country that they come from. And not surprisingly, maybe, the higher their income, the more money they send home. And the amount of money that's involved in remittances is mind-boggling sometimes. India in 2007, for example, received 35.3 billion US dollars in remittances from its migrant workers in other parts of the world. Nearly 60% of that came from Asia. Asia includes the Middle East in this case. About 28% from North America, 13% from Europe. But 2 days ago in one of the newspapers, I saw the 2011 result, which suggests that 58 billion has been received in the last year, but I haven't been able to check the source for that yet. In absolute terms, India receives more in remittances than any other country in the world. China is second, and I think Mexico is third, and Indonesia is fourth. The contribution to the overall Indian economy was about 3%. But other countries such as Eritrea and Moldova, they're very small countries, and they don't earn anything like this, but the contribution to the national economy is 60% to 70%. It's huge. They really depend on their migrant workers. But we mustn't forget the social costs. Indonesia also sends huge numbers of migrant workers abroad, mainly to the Middle East and to East Asia, Hong Kong and so on. People in the Middle East, the people who go there are generally women, uneducated, from villages, and they work as domestic servants, and they experience dreadful, dreadful things. They have no language preparation before they leave home, so they arrive in Saudi Arabia without a word of Arabic. Okay. The fifth study that tries to look at the relationship between language and economic development is based on data from the India Human Development Survey 2005, and it was carried out by 3 people who are based in the States. I think one is at the World Bank and 2 are at the university, but it was a paper that was published by University College London in 2010. And what they, in the India Human Development Survey, large numbers of people across the country were asked to fill in questionnaires and had to say how good they thought their English was and what their income was. And these 3 people, Azam, Chint and Prakash, have analysed this data and looked for correlations to see whether the people who said that their English was good were earning higher incomes and whether the people who said their English wasn't good were earning lower incomes. And they said there is a correlation. There does seem to be a relationship, but it only applies to higher educated people, and it applies much more strongly to younger people than to older people. Finally, a very small-scale study which looked at the language competence of skiing instructors in Switzerland. These are people who teach tourists how to ski. And apparently the tourists who go there and need this instruction tend to speak English or French or German or Italian. The instructors themselves come from different parts of Europe. They're not all Swiss. And what they tried to find out was if the instructor speaks one language, how much are they likely to earn during the skiing season, or 2 languages or 3 languages or 4 languages. And they found, maybe not surprisingly, the more languages the skiing instructor speaks, the more they earn. So the conclusion from this section, I think, is that the evidence is mixed. It's not easy to say that English or any other language contributes to national development or human development or economic development. We've got to be very, very careful, very cautious. Okay, third aspect that I'd like to look at. This is the controversial one. Are there any risks associated with English? I believe that there are. Firstly, there is a trend in some parts of the world. It's in Pakistan, it's in some parts of Francophone West Africa, it's in other countries as well, for policymakers to want English to be used as the medium of instruction at a younger and younger age, because they think that if children are learning mathematics or science or anything else through the medium of English, then ultimately the children's level of English will be higher. This is wrong. There is no evidence at all to support it, and it's actually damaging. If you want children to learn basic skills, basic competencies in primary school, the most effective way of doing it is through the language that the children bring from home. Because that is the language the children already know. It's easy for them to absorb new information. The teacher can build on what the children already know and what the children can already talk about. Links can be made between the classroom and home. Parents can understand what children are learning. Parents can contribute actively to the children's education. And the children's growing identity is supported if the language that they bring from home is the language that they meet in school. If they come to school and find that their home language is marginalized, they learn something. They learn that their background is a marginalized, not recognized background. So there are very strong arguments for not introducing English as the medium of instruction in primary school. But I want to emphasize here that I'm not talking about English as a subject. I'm talking about English as the medium of instruction. It's damaging if it's used inappropriately in healthcare provision. This is something I've added, something I heard. There have been instances where people can't read the information on medicines because it's in English, and they take medicines inappropriately. Or that midwives using medicines inappropriately when working with mothers because they can't read the information leaflets which are in English. In some cases, English is, a lot of money is being spent on English, on the teaching of English, in ways which I believe to be inappropriate. And that those funds could be used much more usefully in other ways. And I'll give you two examples. One from Indonesia. In Indonesia, we have 700 languages, but there is one national language, Bahasa Indonesia. And Bahasa Indonesia is used as a medium of instruction at all levels of education, from nursery school right through school to higher education. So everyone has to study through Bahasa Indonesia. English historically has never had any role in Indonesia. Indonesia was not colonized by the British. And so English has been very insignificant there. But recently, about 4 years ago, the government decided that there needed to be English medium schools in every district in the country. There are 500 districts. So every district is to have one English medium primary school, one English medium junior secondary, one English medium senior secondary, and one English medium technical high school. And a huge amount of money was allocated for these schools. Not only that, but these so-called English medium schools would also get the standard grant that every school gets from the government. So this is a big addition from central government. Then the provincial governments are also giving extra money to these schools, and the district governments are giving further money to these schools. So suddenly we find incredibly well-resourced schools, but only one per district. And a district may have several million people, populations of several million people. So that there are these very rare but very, very wealthy schools, government schools, not private schools. And they're spending their money on putting in air conditioning. I've heard stories, though I haven't actually seen one, of some schools building swimming pools, sending their teachers to Singapore for refreshment, and trying to teach mathematics and science from year one through the medium of English. What's happened is that very rapidly these schools, these very well-resourced schools, have become the elite schools for the district. And the social elite, the government officials, are sending their children to those schools. So in other words, the people who least need a subsidy are getting a massive subsidy. And the people who most need a subsidy, the people in the villages, are not getting this subsidy. Paulin Gité is a sociolinguist based at a university in Australia, but he comes from Ivory Coast. But he's very concerned about why Africa doesn't seem to develop. He's written a book, a very, very powerfully, very persuasive book, in which he argues that Africa is poor because of colonial languages. Because most of Africa is using either English or French or Portuguese, a little bit of Spanish. And his conclusion is Africa is poor because people cannot access education, they cannot access health provision, their economic opportunities are constrained, and they cannot participate in government because their language is not the language that's used in all of these systems. The final area where I think there is a risk associated with English is that in some countries, you tell me whether this applies to India or not, but in some countries there is a real risk that English is associated with higher social classes, and it leads to social divisiveness. And if I go back to the example of inappropriate use of resources from Indonesia, we can see this happening already, even though it's very recent. It's the children of the local elite who are going into the English medium schools. And this is leading to huge resentment on the part of ordinary people. They see that the people, the bureaucrats, the members of the local government who are supposed to be serving them are benefiting from this lavish expenditure on education. And it's also their children who are getting English and not our children. So English is associated with social divisiveness. What I'm trying to suggest is that we must be aware of it. And efforts have to be made as far as possible to ensure that everyone has equal access to English, and that English does not become a sort of a tool for keeping people out, for excluding people. The particular way, the particular solution in any particular society is going to be different. But it's an issue that we must keep in mind. I'm not saying ban English, definitely not. But there is an issue that is worrying and we must be aware of. Okay, so what roles does English usefully play? There are some. Clearly, firstly, English is a language of wider communication. And as this world that we live in becomes more and more mobile, and we interact with people from other parts of the world more and more, we need languages for that, to facilitate that interaction. English is one. I deliberately used a language of wider communication. It's not the only one. There are other international languages which also play important roles, such as French, such as Chinese increasingly, such as Arabic and Spanish and others. And then there are also languages which function as languages of wider communication, not universally, and not internationally, but within certain regions. For example, in Eastern Africa, Swahili, I think, or Hausa in several countries in North Africa. So we need languages of wider communication, and probably English is going to be one of the most important ones. For employment, English clearly, in many contexts, English plays a very important role in employment. If you want to be an airline pilot, wherever you live in the world, wherever you're going to fly your planes, you need English because it's an international requirement. It's a regulation. And then within other particular countries or other contexts, English will be important for employment as well, for call centers, for example, and many other examples. But there is an interesting phenomenon associated with this. Job adverts in newspapers in Indonesia, maybe in India also, often specify English is required for the job. But if you look at the nature of the job itself, English is not really needed to do the job. English is being used as a way of filtering, exactly. The people who feel that their English isn't good won't apply. Okay. International mobility. We've already looked at migrant workers moving around the world. People study abroad more and more and more. And people who are going to study in English-speaking countries clearly need English in order to do so. 45% of international students who are studying outside their own country, are studying in Anglophone countries. North America, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. But some other countries also provide English medium higher education. There are some universities in Malaysia which do it, and some other places. Tourism. English is widely used in tourism, even though the host country and the visitors don't have English as their first language. English is very often used as the language of communication. Labour we've talked about. Pilgrimages, this is something I've become interested in recently, and I've got no evidence at all to support it. But I think it would be interesting to see what languages are used in reality when people undertake religious pilgrimages going from one country to another. Unlocking development opportunities and accessing information. What I mean here is, for example, United Nations agencies or other international agencies, World Bank and so on, Asian Development Bank, provide, well, they do lots of research. It's usually published in English, though sometimes French. They provide training opportunities. They provide opportunities for people to undertake study tours to other parts of the world. And English plays a very important role in these facilities, these opportunities. So if you want to make use of them, you almost certainly have to have some knowledge of English. And then learning languages, learning any language other than your first language is mind-enhancing. And every child in every education system should come out of school, by the end of school, with at least 3 languages, I think. And we can argue about the number, but clearly teaching languages in school is as important as teaching mathematics or science. And then in some parts of the world, English has been given a very interesting task of being a link language. Some people call it a neutral language, but I don't like the term because no language is neutral. And I'll give you 2 examples very briefly. One is from Algeria. You said you've worked in North Africa.
Morocco.
Oh, right. Near, next door. Algeria has had a long-standing problem of some people wanting to continue to use French, which was the former colonial language, some people wanting to use Arabic, and some people wanting to use Berber languages, indigenous languages like Kabyle. And there was a time, about 15 years ago, when the Algerian government considered the possibility of using English in schools as a neutral language, so that the French speakers and the Arabic speakers and the Berber speakers would stop fighting each other or arguing with each other, because English would then be acceptable to everybody. It's a nice idea. In the end, they didn't do it. But Sri Lanka has been doing this for a long time. As we know, there are 2 main communities in Sri Lanka. They don't seem to like learning each other's language, and they sometimes misunderstand each other, or at least in recent years they did. Things are getting better now. But the Sri Lankan government has been encouraging the use of English very strongly as a link language between the two communities. And this is not only in school, but also in local government and in central government as well. There's a very interesting German project going on at the moment in the northeast of Sri Lanka, teaching English to local government officials so that they can talk to each other. Sometimes we find English playing a useful role where you would least expect it, or where I would least expect it. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm involved in a new project in Francophone West Africa. And one of the things, I'm working with a team of 14 people there who are collecting data. And one of the things we've found already is that in the 8 countries of Francophone West Africa, a lot of people, a lot of individuals make their living by trading across international boundaries. Sometimes they go from their country to the country next door. Sometimes they go much further afield. So, for example, we had a case of somebody who grows potatoes in Guinea and sells them in Sierra Leone. Guinea is a French-speaking country. Sierra Leone is an English-speaking country. So if he wants to sell his potatoes, he has to have a bit of English in order to do it. Somebody else, more adventurous, he goes to China and buys motorbikes and brings them back to Mali. He doesn't speak Chinese, so he uses a network of Malian students in China who act as his interpreters. And there are lots and lots of cases like this going on. Many of them are women, and many of them are uneducated. They haven't finished primary school. Some of them are not even confident in French. So there are lots of interesting language issues here. In order to do this work, they need to have some competence in the language of the country they're buying from or selling to. And because Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone are all English-speaking countries, many of them say, I wish I had some English so that I could do my buying and selling. And here are 3 examples. Here's a gentleman from Burkina Faso, and you can see what he sells in his little shop. He sells electrical bits and pieces, and he goes to Ghana to buy them, and then brings them home and sells them. So they're just private individuals with little shops or stalls in the market. Here's a lady who sells alcohol, and she buys it in Nigeria and brings it home to Burkina Faso and sells it. And here's a lady who, I can't remember where she buys her shoes, but it's not in her home country. Individuals on their own initiative are going abroad, sometimes long, long distances. One man told me himself, he buys phosphate in Senegal and he sells it in India. And then he goes a bit further, and with the money that he made in India, he buys rice in Thailand and brings it back to Senegal. All on his own. He's not employed by anybody. But he needs English to do this. Okay, so conclusions. English clearly is important. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying ban English. We have to remember it's not the only international language. It's too easy to exaggerate the importance of English. The rhetoric surrounding English is sometimes louder than the facts, and we must remember that there are some risks associated with it. I think this book is just the beginning. I don't think we've got answers yet. The more I talk about this and the more I discuss it with people, the more I realize how much more I need to know. We need lots more research, and I think that research should involve people like us, who are probably mostly English language teaching specialists, but we also need to learn from other disciplines. And this is very difficult. I've been trying to do this, and it's not at all easy, to get development specialists to talk to us or to listen to us. Or economists, for example. Bridging this gap is crossing these boundaries between disciplines is extremely difficult. One way in which we've been trying to do it is through a series of conferences called the Language and Development Conferences. These conferences take place once every 2 years. And they've been going on for nearly 20 years now. The 9th one, the most recent one, took place in Sri Lanka in October, 2 months ago. And this particular conference, the last one, there were people from outside the English language teaching field there. There was a human rights lawyer who's interested in English. There was someone from Save the Children Fund, a specialist in early childhood education. The proceedings from the first 7 conference are on our website. They've been published by different organizations. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you for listening and for your contributions.
Thank you very much, Hywel, for the talk. It was stimulating, and I didn't realize how many people here could qualify as skiing instructors, speaking 3 or 4 or more languages, as a lot of people in this room do. Does anyone have any questions to ask? Particularly if you wish to argue with Hywel.
Ray, is it Hywel? Are you Welsh by any chance? Or?
I am.
Yeah. English has profligated its way around the world, and in Wales, for example, I'm not sure if we hear Welsh that often anymore. France tried to take French words, or the government tried to take English words out of the French dictionary. Is there a danger that, you know, cultures or languages may get spoilt, and therefore cultures over time may get kind of spoilt as well with this profligacy of English?
Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting and passionate topic. Yes, I'm Welsh. I'm a victim of the power of English. My grandparents were monolingual Welsh speakers. My mother was monolingual Welsh speaker until she went to school, and then she had to learn English at school. I don't speak Welsh. So in 3 generations, this family has gone from monolingual Welsh to monolingual English. And this is a very, very common experience, not only in the UK, but in other parts of the world as well. However, the situation in Wales has changed a lot since I was a child. Now, there is a completely different policy, and all schools in Wales are bilingual. And parents have to decide whether they want their children to be educated through Welsh as a first language and English as a second language, or English as or the other way around. English is the first language and Welsh is the second language. So anybody who goes to school, anyone who's been to school in Wales for the last 20 years or so is bilingual. And it's been extremely successful. And it's led to a tremendous resurgence in the Welsh language. There's lots of publications, there's a television channel, so that's been extremely successful. But what you're talking about behind that is there are languages which have been accused of being killer languages. There's a Danish sociolinguist called Tove Skubna-Kangas, and who's written about killer languages, and she means languages like English which are so powerful that they lead to other languages gradually dying out. And it's not only English, it's happening in other parts of the world as well. David Crystal as well, I think, has talked about this.
I have exactly the same experience as Hywel. One of my grandparents was Gaelic speaking. One of my great-grandparents was Gaelic speaking, so it took 4 generations to die out, rather than 3. But that's how it is, the same thing.
A very interesting discussion on losing languages vis-a-vis your grandparents. I mean, here's my journey. My grandmother was a monolingual Bengali. My father picked up, Bengali he spoke at home, then he learned English, and eventually at work he learned Hindi. I was born in Bihar, so I grew up with Bengali, Hindi, and English, and eventually when I went to school I learned Sanskrit. So I think there is also a reverse journey that can take place and which good education can give you. So that's one point I wanted to make. So it's not necessarily a one-way journey. The other point I wanted to make, and this is a response to Hywel's lecture, and Hywel mentioned that we met in Colombo at the Language and Development Conference. there was an extraordinary session there where the Sri Lankan Minister of Education got up to speak, and he simply said to the likes of us and Hywel and Ray and all of us, I really don't care what you educationists and planners think. My voters want English, and I shall give it to them. So I think that is also a very powerful impulse. I don't mean to discredit him in any way, and I think as educational planners and policymakers, we really need to acknowledge that impulse. We cannot really exist in an academic vacuum and sort of, weave theories and, statistics, and valid as they are. So I think that impulse is a very strong one too.
I think we cannot just say policymakers or people in government know better. Even if they say that they're responding to the demands of their voters, they waste money sometimes. They often waste money doing things which they think are right, but because they don't listen to research, they don't look at research, they don't look at how they could more effectively spend their money. Vast amounts of money are being wasted, often on English language teaching initiatives. So I think we don't have to accept what policymakers say when they say that they're doing what their voters want. Of course, they have to listen to what their voters want, but they have to listen to people who know about education as well. Sorry.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've exhausted the issue. Thank you very much indeed for attending, and can I ask you to thank Hywel once again for a very stimulating talk. Thank you very much.